right, guys, let's get started. Hello, happy Friday. How are you doing? I know it's in the morning there in the US. It is the afternoon here, almost evening. It's 5:30 p.m. Hang on with me while I get this set up and shared to my profile. So today we're going to be putting together these super cute succulents. You can do it a couple different ways. You can do it, just very more natural, more contemporary, or you can have fun with it and add faces to the pots. I did look into putting faces on the plants. You either have to choose details like the spines or faces. It seems like they're kind of difficult to do both. But those are the things we'll be talking about today. I'll show you how to measure it all out, how to paint it in a way where it dries in an optimum way. Share now, public, here we go. And this isn't too bad. I'm not going to do two side-by-sides because the drawing on this one is pretty good. It's not hard to do, it really isn't. Like everything else just takes time. We'll measure it out, that way we can move forward confidently as we're doing everything. And I think we are good to go. All right. Hi guys, how are you? Let's get this started. All right, so we're going to be painting 5 different cactuses. A little succulent thrown in here too. And actually this one's fun for me. This is a prickly pear cactus, and the fun part of that is that's a very common plant here in Israel. So the prickly pear fruit right here, you can actually buy that in the grocery store everywhere you go. I learned that you have to have gloves on when you handle it, or else the little spines get in your skin, and it's not fun. I wouldn't recommend it. Anyways, so here's our little guys. I'm going to show you through how to measure everything. Like always, we're going to do the boring part first, and I'm going to do it with you. That way you don't get left behind, and you can do this live with me if you want. You can always skip through and skip ahead if you're watching the replay of this. No problem at all. So we're going to be measuring it out so that we find the center, we get everything all situated, and once we have everything measured out, it'll be a lot easier to just roll forward. We're going to talk a little bit about dry brushing like we got here on the spines. We're going to be using a white gel pen or white gouache later on for these white details. If you're a purist watercolor artist, you block off these areas with kind of like a rubber cement thing called masking fluid, and you peel it off later. But we're not purists, we're here to have fun, and it's a lot easier to just apply gouache, which acts like watercolor in that you can activate it with water. But it's thicker, it's opaque. So this is transparent watercolor, this is opaque, and it leaves these lines. I've played around with a lot of different white pens, and my favorites are either the Jelly Roll white pen, which does all right, but sometimes it mixes with the colors. White gouache is definitely my favorite as far as like making sure the detail's sharp and the white stands out and doesn't get lost in the paint. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna find the middle of our paper, we're gonna find the thirds of our paper, and we're gonna measure out from there so that we have space for 5 different cacti, and then we'll go forward from there. So whatever size paper you have is fine. Let's figure out what I've got. I am working with cold press paper, if you guys don't know that. So here's cold press. I've got 140 pound, which I'm really liking recently. More typical watercolor paper, which you may probably have, is 90 pounds, so it's lighter, it's more likely to warp. But since we're painting just small areas today, that's not a big deal. But I like the 140 pound cold press, means it's got this bumpy texture. If you run your finger across, if you look at it in the light, you can see little like ridges. With hot press, it's much smoother. And the color tends to be more vivid and stay on top. But anyways, cold press, because I like how we're going to be playing around with adding colors in, like this blue right here. And on cold press paper, it has a nice way of granulating that I really like. So that's what we're going to do. So I want to find the middle of my paper, and I want to find the thirds of my paper. I don't know if you guys ever took like photography classes or composition classes. Thirds is appealing as far as composition. So for example, if I broke this into nine different equal sections, so 3 rows, 3 columns, at the point where each of those squares intersect, It's very pleasing to the eye. I actually don't know why at the top of my head to have things positioned in those places. But that's something we're going to take advantage of a little bit in the way of cutting our paper into thirds and positioning it in that way. All right, here's my middle line. Like I always say, I like to use a nice hard pencil. I've got a 6H here. Hard lead means lighter strokes because it's less likely to crumble. Think how soft and crumbly that charcoal is. These are really dark, rich line. This is a really hard pencil, so if you can sketch lightly, it erases lightly later. So I would encourage you to do that. All right, now I want to find, not that way. How many centimeters we got here? Or how many inches, because I'm American and sometimes my brain works that way. Okay, 9. So 4.5. I actually want to measure that out at a different point too. And now I've got my halfway line. All right, so this is going to be our center point. I know it's hard to see with the light pencil. It's a good thing and a bad thing when it comes to these videos, I guess. I'll move the paints down here so it's more interesting for you guys. Now we're just going to divide it into thirds. I don't care about doing it in thirds this way. I want thirds this way for composition. I always put together notes for you guys. So we have these pots down here. I want that very top part where the plant meets the pot to be here on that third, the top of the third line. That's where our plants are going to be coming from. And this other third line will give us some perspective later on for how tall our plants are, because something I'll go into later is you want them to be different heights to make it more interesting. So, all right, let's divide this puppy into thirds. Thankfully with 9 inches, that's super easy. Once again, these are just reference lines. And you want them to be light, unless you're painting something really light. You can paint over them and they won't be seen, but remember everything that you paint over, you won't be able to erase it once it's been painted over. So keep that in mind, especially if you're painting over with a light color. So a lot of times I'll try and, it's very light, isn't it? I'll try and prep my paper to be, or my pencil to be lighter by the time I start painting, so maybe darker now and I'll lighten it up later. All right, so I need to put 5 different pots in here. So what I did is I found the center and then I figured out the spacing I wanted for 5 pots. And this one, I think it was about 2 centimeters for each one. It just kind of gives you a centering point, a way to space things out. So let's see. This is our center. If I do, so 2 inches would be like 10 inches. Okay. Ooh, that'll be nice and big. You still want to leave some margin at the end if you can, because you want to have room for error. I always leave a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to what I'm composing, because I don't want to get trapped into like squishing into the edge. Like I want to leave a little bit of white, that way I don't get stuck. All right, so like I said, we're going to start with the pots down here on this bottom third line. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And this is like our center line. And these are just reference lines for us when it comes to scaling and things like that. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, if you really want, if it helps you that much, you could also mark like where the center of each one is. That way you can more easily center your plants. You don't have to do that as long as your plants end up inside of their, I don't know, their alley at the bottom, it's fine. They will overlap up top, as you can see. Like this is the 1/5 mark, but this left plant is way bigger and comes up ahead. Okay, so hopefully I spill my coffee. So now we've got 5 centered spaces and we want to sketch out what we are doing. So one thing that is pleasing for variety is you want different textures and you want different sizes. So you want all of them to be, and I have it sketched out here, you don't want any of them to end at the same point. Like this cactus on the left, when you include a little arm way up top, it's the highest of everyone. Everything else is a little bit lower. Nothing is on the same line, even the short ones. Like this aloe plant is still a lot taller than this little orb, I guess is the best way to say it. We like that variety. Another thing that worked well for me is because these big plants, especially on the ends, tend to sprawl, and these little guys are more forgiving when it comes to positioning, I tend to draw these first and then draw these in second. I would encourage you to draw these out instead of just painting, just to make sure you have the dimensions right, just from experience of going through this myself. So yeah, so you just start drawing. So for this big guy over here, and once again, it's okay that these things aren't straight, don't worry about that. I like to give myself kind of a centerline reference. And the first thing I'm doing, now it's hard to tell, and I used to grow cacti a lot more a couple of years ago, but the bottom of it is going to be bigger than the top. So you're going to be a little bit small, a little bit tapered here at the bottom before you come up here to the very top. So, and you just make sure it's kind of like a very gradual teardrop. So I want this guy to be pretty tall, but I am going to put his like little arm up here, remember? I'm going to make him go like this. The wonderful thing about plants that I like and that you should like too is that because they're organic and not straight lines, you can fix it as you go along. It's very forgiving. Okay, so then you just keep going with the sketching. You kind of go straight out, and in the same way, you kind of do a teardrop shape. And you're going to see me erasing and resketching as we go, because every time I've done this piece, I have done that just because I want to get the dimensions right. I even in this case tend to do this little ball guy first. That way I have an idea of what dimensions I'm working with compared to this guy on the left. So you want everyone to work together without being too squished. That's how my grandmother says squished. She also washes things, and it's my favorite thing when she says it, instead of washing. So squished, we don't want things to be squished. All right, we got one arm up here, and then we want a little two-step arm here. Once again, we're just trying to give ourselves guidelines that we'll paint over here in a minute. And you can do this a couple different ways. If you want to game the drawing, you can sketch one and then paint it and then move on to the next. That's actually probably better for timing, because when you're in a piece like this, what you want is you want as much time as possible between things to let it dry completely in order to get certain effects. For example, that's why this section down here, I've intentionally left out in this third step these big white areas, because I was waiting for this stuff to dry. That's something we're going to be doing. And the reason why I did it is because you can see this effect right here is because I waited for this little circle up top to dry completely. It left a nice, solid, crisp line. And that's what we want. We want to have those separate leaves. Same here with like the aloe. I didn't paint all the leaves all at once. I let all of them dry before adding the extra leaves, because then they're more separate. They have that clean line, because that's the effect we want. All right, so we'll sketch our little buddy in here. Once again, kind of a bulbous head. Gonna get that one. Once again, we want things to be on different levels. So this is a little further out than the top arm. I might actually move that in a little bit more just for the contrast. See what I mean when it comes to positioning? Okay. big fella over here. Once again, we're not doing it on the same level as the other one. A little bit bulbous at the top. And if you do watch the replay of this later, I always get good information by actually looking at pictures of real cactuses. It's like, oh, that's actually how it's put together. So that's something that helps sometimes if you're trying to wrap your head around how something is put together or arranged. So something you can see right here is that we start with one completely dry layer as the underneath, and later we put a second layer on top after it's completely dry for those nice dark stripes. But because we're just doing one underlayer right now, you don't have to worry about the differentiations. If you have this whole area sketched out and ready to go, you can just fill it in. So let me erase some of the darker lines. So just using that for reference. Okay, awesome. All right, now, since this is actually a pretty big piece, I think I'm going to use a number 10 round. Because of the organic shapes and the tips, I like to use the round because it has the belly and it has more of that. It's easier to make those natural curves when it comes to the rounding and things of that nature. Speaking of which, I think I want this to be a little bit skinnier. Once again, this is all just, you look at it and you make judgment calls on what you like. Not much in here, but something. All right, so the colors that I use for this is I want it to be very diluted. So this is the paint that came straight out of the tubes. I like to use these tubes instead of the normal cakes that you see most of the time. I like to use tubes. These are pretty fancy ones sometimes. Not all of them, but these came straight out of the tube. I don't want to use like the full force of it. So what I did is I mixed a little bit of the yellow green and the phthalo green, so my warm and my cold, to get kind of a mix up here. And I'm adding a lot of water. It doesn't take a lot, really. I want it to be nice and diluted. Now, something else you can do is you can do wet on wet. So you can add, especially since we're doing a light layer right now, you can do either a really diluted wet on dry, so you paint directly onto dry paper, or if you feel like it'll help, or if you want the look of it, you can also put wet water on here first. Wet water, let's go with that. Clean water, that's the word I was looking for, not wet, but let me show you that. You obviously can't see it. It's actually kind of hard to see even when you're working with it, but this is a really good way to get a diluted, united first layer. You put wet, and you put wet, my goodness, wet water. Clear water on first, and then because you're already painting onto a surface that's already diluted, you can be guaranteed a lighter color. So something I can show you for comparison if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. This is like a reference sheet that I use from time to time. You can see when I do a wet on wet mix, like right here, it's much darker. When I do, or this is wet on dry, excuse me. And when I do wet on wet, because it's already on being painted into a puddle of water, that's extra water, extra dilution, so in comparison, it's lighter. So let's do that here. All right. Now, once you start putting paint on here, you kind of got to move, or water in here. Well, the water isn't that big of a deal. Once you start putting paint on here, you got to move fast, because this stuff can dry up pretty quick, and then you don't get a smooth drying finish if that's what you're looking for. So once again, clear water or wet water, as I keep saying. I'm using a number 10 brush. I don't need a lot of precision right now, but I do need to cover a lot of area, so that's why I'm using it. Get that going. kind of got that diluted mix of warm and cold greens up here. And I can just start filling in. Now, something else I want to do and mix in with it is I'm actually going to use some of this, my cold blue. I have something called manganese blue hue, and that's actually something I've been liking, the blue effect. So that's something, I know I see it more in like aloe vera plants, but there are certain plants and cacti that have kind of a blue hue, right? So I liked adding that to these cactuses, especially in the underlayers. Even if you don't want to use blue, I would encourage you to use at least varying shades of green. It will make it more interesting. Once again, in the same way that making these different heights and shapes makes it more interesting, adding a little bit of variety of colors, even in the underlayer, helps make it more interesting. Okay. I'll stay wet because I don't want to add the blue if it started to dry, because I want it to have a smooth drying underneath. Ooh, that really filled up, didn't it? Alright. A little bit bulbous. Because this color is strong enough and you'll be putting dark stripes in later, you can always cheat a little bit and change the outline some. Okay, so I'm dipping right into the manganese blue, making sure it's nice and diluted, and I'm just dropping it right in. Now, I don't want it to be too strong, so I'm kind of fussing with it a little bit. I'm diluting my brush and getting a little more of the green because it's a little bit stronger than I want. Something I say in every video, and that I'll say in this one: watercolor always dries lighter. So, and I kind of want it to stay on just the right side over here because I want it to have kind of a shadow effect. Over here, here. Because it's still wet, I can kind of play with the shapes a little bit. But if it weren't still as wet as it is, I don't think I would. Alright, a little more blue over here, make it interesting. Now, I usually prefer to work with hot press paper, but you're more likely to have cold press paper with what you're working with. So that's one reason I'm using it. Another is for mixing colors like this. The granulation of the paper makes it more interesting. Okay, I'm happy with that. Alright, so we already sketched that out. I'm going to use my crazy like Play-Doh eraser. Lighten up the lines. And just to make things easy, I'm going to do pretty much the exact same thing. I'm gonna do wet on wet with this guy. So one thing you can do if you're worried about preserving these lines is you can put painter's tape here at the bottom. Let me finish getting this wet first and I'll show you what I mean. So some people like to use painter's tape in order to preserve like a straight line, because of course this is the line where your pot's going to be and you may be worried that like it's going to overlap and not be a clean line. Well, two things. One, I'm not crazy about using painter's tape, especially on cold press, because there's the danger of it leaking under the tape because of those bumps. It has a tendency to leak under. You can push it down really hard and you'll probably be okay, but I don't trust it. I'd rather have more control. Also, the pot color is very different from the cactus color, and it's stronger, so you'll be able to paint over without any problem. I promise. Okay, make sure this guy's still wet. A little basketball cactus. I'm just gonna use the same colors. I'm not worried about mixing a new undercolor for every one. If anything, it probably gives it a little more harmony to have the undercolors matching. And then changing it up with the details. Alright, we got all of that in there. And then again, I'm gonna drop some blue in because I like that effect. I don't want it to be too blue, so I'm fiddling with it to mix it in. There are other times where you may want it to be more separate, but I want more of a blend. So I'm blending it in here. Okay. Now, especially because those are wet, I actually want to move over to the prickly pear cactus over here for two reasons. One, it's more out of the way and gives these a chance to dry. And two, I told you that the big ones at the end tend to sprawl. And so he'll kind of determine how exactly I'll position these other two plants in the middle. So we're gonna put him together. Now, once again, I told you that we want things to be at different levels. So as you can see, I wanted my little basketball cactus, whatever you wanna call him, I want him to be shorter or at least different from the prickly pear base over here. We want those differences of what's what makes it interesting and attractive. So, and that's where the reference line come in handy. It's like I don't have to guess if I'm about there. I can go back and be like, okay, it's below the reference line. So if I do something above the reference line, even a little bit, I'm keeping things different. Okay. Once again, just sketch things out. You can see over here, just the bottom of the circle is cut off. It's the same deal over here. And it doesn't even have to be centered as long as the bottom is in the pot. Once again, that's the lovely thing about working with plant shapes is that you have that luxury. So we are gonna do, actually, where's my other little guy? Gonna put this guy here. Make him a little bit chubby. Cause it's kind of like, I don't know, like flat palms. And then we'll put the prickly pear fruit up here. I always say it wrong. Ito, how do you say sabar? Am I saying it right? Sabar?
Sabar.
Sabar. I always get the R in it wrong.
Sabar.
Sabar. That's also a slang term for a native Israeli. That's how much of the stuff they have here. So we'll put some of our sabar.
You don't have to like put so much emphasis about it, but when you get used to the word, it's good to do it.
Yeah.
And then it's just sabar.
Sabar. Alright, so then we'll add another little circle here. Okay, and we're gonna do another little oval, kind of like what we got here. And another, and then we can see kind of where this one stops. So we're gonna kind of put this last little prickly pear ball right here. Make it a little bit smaller. And there's your prickly pears. Okay. Now, something that we did over here in this other cactus is we painted it all at once, right? So we're going to go back with lines and that won't matter. However, we're going for a different effect with this cactus. So what we need to do is we need to paint pieces of it that don't touch. So we're not going to paint all of it all at once. You can see, I referenced this earlier, but you can see how like I painted the tzabar fruit and the non-touching bits to let them dry before coming back and adding the rest, because in this case I want those clean lines. Oh, that's what we're gonna do. Again, I'm gonna lighten up my reference lines. Once I paint over them, they're there for good. And once again, I'm not changing the undercolor. I actually need to mix a little bit more. This is the biggest version I've done of this painting, so I'm going through more paint than I did earlier on. Okay, so a little more green than I want. I want more of the yellow green in there. Yeah, that's better. And then I'll make sure it's nice and diluted, starting with a base of clear water. So we'll get the circle going. I actually don't mind that I got a little bit of the green in there because it helps me see, and because that's the color I'm painting on it anyways. Adding the clear water or the wet water, like I was saying earlier. Adding the clear water is notoriously hard to see, because then you're kind of like moving your head around trying to see where the shine is, because it's the only way to see it. But this way at least I can see it with like a more diluted version. Alright. Now I'm not going to add stripes here, so I kind of want this to be a little bit stronger. Now, something that I did in the previous versions, and I'll probably do here, is I think I'm actually going to add a second layer afterwards. Now here's the thing, if you want to get a stronger color by adding a second layer, you can't do it until after it's completely dry. It's completely dry, then it'll layer up and it'll act like putting two panes of stained glass on top of each other. But if you put it together like I am right now, all it does is mix. It doesn't layer, it just mixes. So later on, I'm going to add probably a second layer to these pieces. For now, here's that one. Okay. And then this one doesn't touch. So I'll do same thing here. Make it a little more water than I need. So something you can do if you have too much water is you can blot your brush, and once it's dry it acts like a sponge, and it's called Thirsty Brush, and you can use that to quickly soak up water. I mean, technically you get the paper towel too, but it's not as controlled. I don't like it as much. Thirsty Brush does a pretty good job of doing it in a very localized way. Alright. Let that do its thing. Yeah. Like I said, I want to keep doing the chunks that are separate, and that fruit is still separate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do I want it to be nice and bright. I'm just going to do wet on dry. I'm going to get some of that warm yellow. And following the curve of the leaf underneath, put those on top. And while it's still wet, I'm actually going to throw in some of a pinkish color. Something I probably forgot to put into the description is that I also use this cool red, this alizarin crimson, because something I know is that like all of the prickly pear fruits I've seen, they have a little bit of variation like this. And also, it's just more fun than just a straight up yellow fruit. So if you feel brave, do that. Alright, now we got a couple more up here, which I did too good of a job erasing. those dry. Okay, so those are coming on, but we still have time. Okay. So now we've done that one, and I told you that when it comes to space, the bigger ones are space hogs, and these are pretty good at adapting to whatever's next to them. So I'm actually going to move to the middle plant because it's a larger one, and then the aloe plant will be easier to, it's easier to adjust the aloe plant leaves than to adjust where the bulge of this plant is. So we'll start with this one, move on to this one. All right. Once again, we're sketching it out. We want it to be at a different height and everything else. And it's rough, it's basically the shape of this cactus over here. A little more narrow at the bottom, it bulges up. Maybe a little bit chubbier. Now, something I want to paint here first. Okay, we got that centered, so we can take that center line out. I don't want that in there. Yeah, and the same way that I want that separate effect over here, I want that effect over here for a little guy right here. I'm actually going to paint him first and let him dry. Actually, doing this on camera with you guys, it'd probably be easier to paint the big cactus first and let him dry, because that takes more time. So let's do that. But this little ball we're going to leave out. We're not going to paint over that area because we want that to be separate. So once again, not reinventing the wheel with the undercolor, because we're going to be adding lines and specks later. So, that's right. We're doing wet on wet, so clear water first. It's okay if a little bit of the pigment you're going to be working with ends up in what you're putting on there, and actually probably helps you. Really? Alright, get this sucker going. Okay, alright, that's wet. And once again, we're leaving a negative space where that extra little cactus ball is on top. And then we start adding in our green. For the underlayer. Okay, and then a little bit of that blue. Once again, I'm kind of keeping it to the right side to have kind of a shadow effect, but mostly just for another interesting color, so that it's not just completely flat and boring underneath. Okay. I get that spread out, great. And we are already painting over it, so I'm not too worried about it. Alright, those are still drying. Okay. Now we know exactly how much space we have for our aloe plant, which is good. So this one is actually easier for me to paint wet on dry. I have more control. I want the color to be stronger anyway, since I'm really not going to have anything painted over it. And something I've shown you guys before is that with a round brush, with a change of pressure, you can do different kind of strokes. So if I push it all the way down, you can see how it has a nice even width. But with the very pressure, if I go gentle and then push, gentle and then push, you get different effects. And this is perfect for leaves, or for things like the aloe vera. I guess it's a leaf. I'm not quite sure what the better word is for it. But just as an example, that's why we use the round brush for that. So we're going to use the same colors. And once again, like I showed you here, I want them to be distinct, so I'm not going to paint every single one all at once. Now we're actually going to zap this with a hairdryer here in a little bit, that way we can keep moving faster. So prepare yourself for that. And the way I do it is just like, you know, right about in the center. Maybe right about there. If you want, you can just start with a straight line and then kind of fill it out. But as you can see, it's just a very gentle touch, and then I gently push down, and that gives me that leaf shape. So I also want this to be bluish, like everything else, so it's unified. Maybe add a little more blue down here just to make it more dark, more interesting. Okay. Then you do roughly the same thing, thinking generally in a fan, but also just adjusting for the plants around it. Once again, that's what's nice about this plant, is it plays along nicely. So once again, starting at the top, dragging down, doing wet on dry, because I have more control over this kind of shape this way. Alright, there's another leaf. You can see it's a slightly different width. It ends at a slightly different point, and I'm leaving space between it and the other. And then I can do this one like super short, eyelash. Just to make it interesting. Again, not touching the other one because I want it to be separate. And later we'll add another layer of leaves behind it. Okay, so that one's kind of a chubby one, kind of a regular. I don't know if you guys have ever had to use aloe for a sunburn. My grandmother used to have some at her house in Florida. I remember one year when I was a teenager, I didn't think I needed sunscreen, and I was wrong. So, and those big fat leaves like that were great. They were great. I was very grateful she had that little plant in her front yard. Alright, we'll do that one. And maybe we'll do one more. I like a nice chubby aloe plant. And also these leaves are fun to make. It's a fun shape. Put a little bit of blue in. Great. A little point there. Okay. Alright, now we have our first layer on. But as you can see, it's still shiny, even our first one. Maybe this one is a little bit dry. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna gently use the hairdryer, because we want to move to the next stage. We can't start putting the pots in yet because things are still wet. We can't start adding details beyond this because our lines aren't dry enough to work with. So the best thing to do for now, if I'm going to keep painting with you at a reasonable pace, is to zap it with a hairdryer. Try and use a low setting and hold it far away from the page. Look out for the places where the paint has puddled. If you're not careful, it'll splatter. So you don't want that, of course. But if it's like got a nice, if it's more damp than dry, if it's like still a little bit shiny but not as shiny as something that you just put down, that should go pretty quick. So once again, here comes a dryer. It's gonna be loud. As you can see, this is one of the last things I painted with a big area. So this has a pretty big puddle up here. I don't know if you saw it jumping, but that is where most likely for things to splatter right now. So I'm gonna try and aim accordingly. it a little bit. So I'm gonna take a little bit of clean paper towel, and that's not too bad. Because that water beaded up there, it made it prone to spray. So it's okay. We'll figure it out. So this one actually still has some drying time, but I'm going to get back to that last, so I'm not as worried about that. I'm actually going to go ahead and add another layer here, because this I feel like is not quite dry, and I really want those stripes to be as clean as possible, and it needs to be completely dry. So I'm going to give that a second just to make sure it's on board, and I'll show you how to deal with that smear too. And then also something happened here, some kind of paint got in there, not sure how, but we will also deal with that. So apparently this is a good problem solving video, guys. All right, here we go again. Wet on wet. So we get a nice clear layer here. And as you can see, since the other layers are completely dry, either by time or by hairdryer, we get nice clean lines instead of mixing, which is what we want. So there's that layer. A little bit of blue, like the rest. Same for these other pieces. That there, put this here. Those areas wet. Alright, there's that. Because these are small and so saturated, I'm just working fast on both of them. A little bit of that going. And a little bit of blue in both. Okay, and now that one can dry and we'll come back to it later. Alright, I do think we're okay right here, so all we're going to do is start adding stripes. So what I did is I took that phthalo green and mixed it with some of that blue I've been using earlier, that cool blue. I also threw some brown in because I want it to be dark, but a little bit warm too. There we go. And then you kind of act like your cactuses are the Yankees and you start putting pinstripes on them. Now remember, you're painting over curved areas. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to real quick paint in, oh, I gotta mix the paint first. This little guy right here, that way he has time to dry. Once again, that's the trick with this stuff. It's all about drying time. Blue, blue, blue. There we go. All right, pinstripes, that's where we were. And we get back to our mix of phthalo green, cool blue, and brown to give ourselves a nice dark color. I'm actually probably going to use more of that since this piece is bigger than other ones I've done before. And I prefer to have too much than not enough. Especially because once you start working wet, you want to work fast. All right. So to fill out the cactuses, I've been using this number 10 brush. I'm using a slightly smaller brush. This one's actually my favorite. It's a number 5 round. It's a good one. So remember, you don't want to just go straight down. You're not painting, on a straight wall. You're painting on something curved. So you kind of want to act like almost like you're drawing on a balloon. So down here is more straight. But up top is more curved. Once again, the beauty of botanicals is that because it's organic, you don't have to be straight or super regular. That's where it's forgiving. And if your line isn't dark enough now or later, don't worry. It's easy to go back over and add it to be stronger. Now, something I like to do, it's a nice fade that you can see here. This very far edge, I actually have it disappearing into a second line. It's nice, it adds a hint of the roundedness. I think I'm gonna do that here. So as you can see, I'm kind of bracing on my pinky. This gives me some stability without me putting my palm into some of the wet spots there. And just pinstriping. You can use smaller brushes too if that makes you more comfortable. Another good tip that you can do right now is you can see that some of, especially with the cold pressed paper, the lines didn't dry very straight. This is a good time for me to go back and correct them. There's that one. This one thicker. Once again, trying to follow the curve of the top. And then adding like on the other side, that kind of like half line. To give more of an illusion of curve, of roundedness. So, and then you just keep doing that. So in that same way where we had that illusion, this top line I'm actually not going to take to the far edge. I'm going to take it a little bit to the middle for that line, and then I'm going to do that half line again over here. And that way I get to clean up the edge. Bring it right there. Nice. This one I do. I'll do a little it's organic, so you can have a lot of fun with the shapes. I'm gonna round that just because it was getting a little funky up there. Alright, same here. Line more in the middle, half line down the edge. Once again, kind of covering the lines that got a little bit funky earlier. Again, if your line's dry too light, you can always go back and paint over them for a second, stronger layer. Here. That one here. And I'm going to wait until the end to show you what I do with that. You can't go over with white gouache. I'm not crazy about the effect. There's something else that's a little more subtle that doesn't work in hot press nearly as well, but in cold press, because the paper is already not smooth, you can get away with actually scraping off that top layer a little bit with an X-Acto knife. But I'm going to wait until later when this paint is not wet to show you. I don't want those little flakes getting into what I'm doing, and I don't want to slip and do something weird to what I made. Let's go back. Alright, one more set of stripes over here. We have stripes. Lovely. Now, we'll let that dry and we'll come back and do spines later. Now, something that you'll see here is that not only do we have stripes and spines on this one, we have a flower. But like over here, we start with part of the flower. So we're going to do part of the flower and the spines here. So I like this one to be yellow, and I'm partial to that warm yellow I've got. What is that again? Cadmium yellow medium. It's very cheerful. So all I'm doing is, much like the aloe leaves here, I put them close to each other but not touching, because I want to have this effect later where they're separate petals, completely distinct of each other. So I do a couple of petals at first, kind of like teardrop shapes with the point of the teardrop on the cactus. So once again, because it's a small thing and I want more control, I'm just painting it right onto the paper. And then you kind of get to decide how big you want the flower. I think I want that to be nice and showy. So maybe a little bit bigger. Once again, you can start small and increase, but once you go a certain size, not really any going back. So trimming the bushes on the alley. So that might be going on for a while, guys. Sorry if that's bothering you. All right. Now, something that you can do here, which I did not intentionally, you can do a slightly different shade of like a dark green. This I ended up just doing like a really strong phthalo green, my light green. Or you can just stick with this color. I kind of like the contrast it made, even though it wasn't intentional when I first did it. So I'm actually going to do that. Once again, this needs to be perfectly dry, and it is. All right. And then I think I can actually stripe while that's drying. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. Okay. Anyways. Doo-doo. Now these stripes, of course, are thinner in comparison to the cactus. And once again, we're putting stripes like we're doing stripes around like a beach ball almost. You don't want them to be straight up and down like your reference lines. So I'm gonna do more of like a strong phthalo green. Maybe with a little bit of my blue put in. I just want it to be more greenish, not the olive green I have here, but more of that like phthalo green, more of that bluish green. Because I like the difference. Once again, it's all about making variety. So once again, you start with the curved line. If it's easier, you can always like start closer to the edge. Once again, you can see I'm not starting at the very top, kind of ending at different spots. I'm going to do this before worrying about my stripes or spikes. And you'll see that we have a few different strategies for spikes. There's a gap in there as we turn the corner, that's okay. I'm just emphasizing that it's round. I'm going to do another teeny tiny line on this edge right here to show the roundness, and because that line actually ended up drying kind of jagged, so that helps me clean it up. All right, now I've got a beach ball of stripes. And if I come back in, all I'm doing is drawing X's with the exact same stuff. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna like stagger the X's. So that if I do two like this, I then do them offset over here. That way you have more room. And don't worry if they go off the cactus a little bit, that actually gives it a little more texture. Oh Lord, if this were a drinking game, I'm guessing texture would be one of the words. And then just add your spikes in. Very easy. And same with the spikes on the edges. It's okay if they overlap, because it gives it more texture. Alright. Now I got a little basketball cactus done. Alright. Now we're gonna do the same type of stripe over here. Nice and thin, with X's for spikes. So I'm actually gonna use the same color I did here. I may actually use a bigger brush because it's a bigger area. Alright, so the way I did that is I added my phthalo green with my cool blue with the brown. So I had a little bit of a bluish olive green, which I really like. Okay. Alright, let's do this. So in the same way you don't want it to be completely straight, this is still wet, so I'm gonna avoid it. Paint right up to the edge of it, but not over top of it. You can make these lines, even if they're the same idea as its little neighbor over here, you can make them a little bit thicker since it's a larger plant. But it's the same idea, it's small lines. And we're gonna add X's to them here in a minute to show that it has space. So again, if you're on this side of the plant, you curve to this side. Once again, you can do a little bit thicker if you need to. And again, not starting at the same spot. And again, if these lines aren't dark enough for what you want, you can always go back and add a second layer later. And if you want, I can keep narrating every line for you, but I figure that's not what you're looking for. And this one here. It's actually dry, so bring those lines right up to it. And I think this one actually looks better with a little bit of an outline there up top. Okay. Now, in the same way that we did this X's here, we just do the X's here. And then we'll come back and add the stripes to the little guy up top. So. Once again, just X's for spikes. Something I may actually go back and do later is with these thicker lines, I may go back after everything is dried and repaint the X's a little bit darker so they stand out more. I don't know if you guys in the camera can hear it, but we have a cat that likes to come here for milk. She's letting us know that she's at the door and she's decided that now is dinner time. So if you're wondering why there's a cat sound, that's why. Her name is Cola, and she's been the star of a few of my other lives because she likes to be center of attention. All right, so we got our spikes all put in there. I feel confident that this is dry, so we'll go ahead and just keep going. Same as we did here. Nice and thin. You're painting a beach ball. I think I want those lines to be a little bit darker because this color here ends up being darker too. Just making it nice and spiky. And then also, so that we got going on here is another flower. So again, we start, well, now that it's wet, maybe not there right now. Okay. This looks completely dry, which is great. And that's still wet, that's interesting. But now we'll just go ahead and keep adding here. Same colors as before, maybe a little bit stronger just to make sure there's some kind of contrast. I'm using a smaller brush now because I want more control to get along the edges of these leaves. So earlier I used more of the number 5 brush. Now I'm using a 3/0 brush apparently. All I know is it's the size I want, and it's smaller than what I had before because I want a nice thin tip to get into those spaces. Once again, just like with those other leaves, I'm doing it wet on dry, so right onto the dry paper. Some of that blue. Make this one nice and short just to be fun. Blue. And then here to make sure it all connects. Maybe do that one a little bit long. there's our aloe plant. I'm going to add a few details here on the sabar. Like I said, they're a little bit spiky, but they kind of like have a warty texture. So hi Ortal, I didn't notice that you joined. How are you? So I'm going to get more of that alizarin crimson and just put a few dots on here now that these are completely dry. So what's interesting is that I kind of did this before, but because it was wet, it had that blooming effect. But because these are no longer wet, they just look like freckles, and that's how they'll dry. Alright. Now, that one's dry, so I can go back and add to that. Another thing I want to add to is I want to put, now that that's drier, I want to put a pink flower up there. So if you have a red, you can just do a very light red. If you have like a pink tube, you can do that. I really like how the alizarin crimson looks like when it's diluted. So once again, I'm going to do a couple petals and let them dry. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Just doing pretty much the same shapes as the yellow one below. And we'll come back and add more petals later, like we're about to do now with this one. I want there to be more of a difference. I'm actually gonna mix a little bit of this orange here in with the yellow. I want it to be similar. I want it to be just different enough so that you can make sure that there's different petals. After all, we did all the hard work of letting it dry like this, so we might as well take advantage of those textures. A little more reddish in there, more of a contrast. Here we go. Once again, I'm using a pretty small brush to stay in control, and I'm doing it wet on dry. There we go. And we got a big cheerful orange flower on there. Alright, what do I want to tackle next? The flowers there are too wet. That I think could probably use another set of lines to darken it up. Once again, if you do it when it's still wet, it won't darken it up, it'll just mix. But if you add a second layer, it makes it stand out more. It stacks, I guess is the best way to put it. But it doesn't stack unless it's dry. If it's wet, even if it's damp, it mixes. Alright. And then same here, I think I'd like to do a little more right here with these guys. Once again, because it's stacked, it's going to be a stronger color, it won't mix. Yeah, I like that standing out more. So once again, just painting over the same lines to give them a little more emphasis. until these lines are dry too, so I can stack it in the little cactus. Okay. Now, that is still doing its thing. That I still need to correct. We'll come back to that. So, dry brushing. Okay, so when you are doing a wet paint stroke, for example, you are doing something nice and uniform. So we'll use like purple as an example. If I've got the brush nice and fully loaded, some artists say, and just put it in like this, you can see where it just pulls and has a nice smooth thing. But if you pat it off in a paper towel and you go more lightly, you can see where it has this dry effect. And this is a lot more fun on cold press because the unevenness of the texture is more friendly to it. This also depends on the kind of brush you have, but you can get a different effect if you remove a lot of the moisture from it. So there's so many variations. There's to how you can do something with the same brush, the same colors. You can add more water to dilute the color. You can have less paint on the brush so that you have like a dry stroke, things of that nature. So I say that because when we want to go for spikes like this, and it's like if you want to add these to other ones, go to town, have a ball, baby. But to get this is such a tiny stroke, and you want it to be so fine that, well, honestly, if you want, you could do it with a pen, a very fine tip pen, and have more control, or you can get more of this organic-y thing and use a very, very tiny brush. So, for comparison, this is the 10 that I use to fill everything in. This is the 5 that I love the most. This is the this is the 3/0 that I was using to do some of these details just now. And then way smaller is, I don't even know what this is, 20/0. So that's the 3, this is 20. Very, very tiny, very little hair. So, but doing this with a dry brush can have some great details. I don't use it very often otherwise because it's kind of looks like it's had a bad hair day, so I don't feel like I have much control over it. But in this situation, it can have a lot of merit when it comes as a dry brush when you want that unpredictability. So basically what I do is I do like V shapes, so 1, 2, 1, 2, and you don't want them to be, completely uniform. And you may need to take, a little time to use on scratch paper, just like how you want it to go. There we go, okay. But you want it to be a little hairy, a little goofy. Alright, come on now. It's actually being more shy than I thought it would be. I may end up moving to a bigger brush because this one's having a hard time with, how strong the cold press is here. So once again, I'm gonna get used to it a little bit. I'm on scratch paper. Okay, that's a lot more what I'm looking for. Apparently I need a slightly bigger brush for this effect here. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2. So again, I'm not trying to go for uniformity, I'm just trying to give myself kind of a starting point. You want it to be kind of feathery. You don't have to hit every point. You're just trying to give like some kind of illusion of thorns. So once again, the fun thing here is that there are different ways to show that a cactus is spiky. Here we did the cross hatching. Here we're doing it on the edges. Here. Just roughly in 2s, little clusters. It's okay if they overlap. you're roughly doing the perimeter of the cactus. You don't have to go in order, you can just have fun with it. Like, this gets a little squirrely sometimes for me. And once again, if you're not sure kind of what this looks like, you can always refer to real life pictures and get kind of an idea of, oh, well, that's an interesting effect that I can add. That's a little juicy, unfortunately. All right, it's okay. I don't always stick to twos, but it's roughly the idea. Change that up a little bit. That side's very hairy. Okay. Alright, so he's all spined up. Alright, good. We're getting close to those being a little more dry. Same here. How are we doing here? Oh, that's nice. Okay. So we got the spines over here. And this is what I mean. You're kind of looking to see, this is how you have to work with it as like as a watercolor piece. You're trying to figure out what's ready, what's not ready. And it's just like, okay, if this is still wet and I can't work on it, where else can I work? So something like this, it's basically 5 mini paintings, and that's good because painting 1 and 2 may still be wet, but then you can move to painting 3 or 4. And this is a great piece for that. So anyways, these flowers are dry, I can work there. But these little circles are still damp, I can't touch that yet like I want to. So again, I'm gonna paint this flower here. Actually, I'm gonna do a little bit of purple for the petals behind it using a tiny, tiny, tiny brush. To fill in the negative space behind it. I think I'll do one little more on the side here. By the way, guys, I try really hard to make sure I don't put my fat head in the middle of this, but I never know if I do. If I'm being honest. Okay. So there's that. Alright, that's dry. So I know that I can add another layer here like I did down here, because I like making this a little bit stronger. So you heard my boyfriend talking in the background earlier. What you don't know is that he gave me a piece of cake while I've been teaching, and he's also about to start a backgammon lesson, which he offered to move because he knows that when I do these videos, you'll be able to hear it too. But you get the extra bonus of free backgammon tips while I'm teaching. So there's that. If you can hear him in the background, that is. Alright, so that hairy little ball's all put together. Make that whatever joke you wish there. How are we doing here? Now it still feels a little cool, a little wet. I'm gonna wait. But what we can do right now is we can start putting in the terracotta pots. Ta-da! Okay, so I cheated and pre-mixed the color. This is the kind of color that we're going for. So what we're doing with this is we're gonna mix together like the warm yellow, a little bit of the warm red, and the brown. We're going for like that terracotta clay thing. We do have to cover quite a bit of ground right here. So I'll probably need to add more no matter what. So, but you can see what we're shooting for. Alright, warm yellow. A little bit of red. Getting there, okay. And brown. A little more red, I think, will help us out. Or a lot of red, oh my. that's about right. That's about right, maybe a little more. Because once again, I know this is going to dry a little bit lighter. This doesn't look like terracotta here, but I promise you, once it's painted on, it's got a nice terracotta effect. All right, so something we want to roughly do, and I actually like waiting until after I've got like, you know, like with like a standard terracotta pot, you've got like, I don't even know what to call it, the collar around the edge of it. So that's what this straight piece is here. And then we wait for that to dry before putting on the bottom of the pot. So you don't really need to measure anything out. It's just easy. You're just gonna go, you don't even have to, I'd actually encourage you, like, hopefully you can see the lines are so light, but I have these notches marked out here. So I don't want you to take this all the way to that edge. I would encourage against it, because if you do, then you would have no space between your pots. That's not what you want. So I would encourage you to take the collar of your pot just a little bit past, and I'll show you with each one. Everything looks dry enough down here, that's no problem. I showed you earlier, and if you really felt paranoid about that straight line, you could have put tape on here, and that way when you peeled it off, you had a very nice straight line. I have no fingernails, guys. Underneath, if the tape worked properly. Doesn't always, anyways. But as you can see, like with here, it overlaps that line a little bit. You can definitely see how it's done that here on this pot. I'm still gonna follow this line, but the good thing is that this terracotta color is strong enough that it's gonna overpower it. And once again, if you let it dry and come back and paint over it again, it will then be even more strong. So for this, I'm just gonna do wet on dry. They're small enough details that I don't wanna fuss around with doing wet on wet. So yeah, just doing a little bit of a shelf right here. And then we want these to dry completely before we add the bottom pots. Probably should have done these earlier. That's okay. But as you can see, it's kind of on either side of the cactus. I'm nowhere near the lane markers that I've made for myself, and that's fine. I still have my reference line from earlier, so I'm following that for the top of the collar, and just kind of coming down a little bit for the collar of the pot. Again, just going a little bit past where the plant is. At the bottom, I'll have to probably beef up a little to cover over the green. That's okay. That's what layering is for if needed. So yeah, you just put that on there and do that for all of them, making sure that it's completely dry down here, or else you will not get a terracotta finish. You'll get terracotta bleeding into the plant and the plant bleeding into the terracotta. I'm saying terracotta a lot, and I'm pretty sure that's what this color is, but I might be wrong, hopefully not. I've said gouache wrong plenty of times in the past, in the recent past, so. Alright, let's get this sucker. And you see how I was able to paint over, with those leaves, it's really hard to get them to terminate at exactly, you know, a clean line. The paint helps with stuff like that, or the painter's tape helps with stuff like that. But also when you paint over it with a nice darker color, problem solved. Nice, clean, straight line. Ta-da! Here we go. Here we go. Put that here. And put that over here. Get the color right there. Alright, this I actually am not going to put the terracotta color on, and here's why. I want to put a second layer on here. So, this lesson, we're going to learn a few things about dealing with mistakes. Watercolor, it's really hard to correct things, deal with these things. You kind of got to roll with the punches. Like this one, I think I actually may go back with a special kind of pen I have to make the details a little different. I'm not sure yet. Or else I'm just over worried about it. Anyways, about the whole painting, right? It's step away from it. So I'm actually gonna repaint this. So here's something that sometimes happens. So as the paint dries, sometimes it has little clumps. And it looks like a tiny bit flaked off while I was hair drying. So some tiny flake of like this purplish color ended up here while it was wet and then bled into it. I can't take that out, but I will try and make this one more layer and make it darker. Because what else can I do, guys? Watercolor leads to a lot of problem solving. So to get this effect, I did wet on wet, but here's the thing. I wanted lighter colors underneath these plants with stripes. This one really doesn't have it, and I want white effect. So I'm actually okay with the second layer being wet on dry, painting right onto the dry paper and getting a stronger effect. Not just to cover my mistake, but to make this a darker color. Something that I did in this little first sketch that I did that I showed you guys is I painted these all twice to give them that darkness so that the white came through better. So let's paint over that, guys. Same colors. Here we go. I'm pretty sure my bangs are in there, which I have been trimming myself the past week, and still not sure how I feel I'm doing about that. But what can you do? Alright, again, I bump back up to my great big number 10 round since I'm filling a big space. I'm using the same colors I did before. Now the good thing about watercolor is you can kind of reactivate it, so I'm trying to kind of scrub this dark color to try and minimize the effect it's got in there. Get this going. Come on, feller. And I actually am going to do the other ones as well, just to make it consistent. And try and put an extra bit of blue down here to cover it up more. Oh, it's a nice, strong color. Sorry, I get excited when I see the colors start to come together. It makes me happy. Alright, need to mix a little bit more of this. Lovely, lovely. And then once again, you can see how with the wet on wet, the lines got a little funky. I have more control when it's wet and dry as far as the crispness of the lines. So I'm gonna come in here and kind of correct the lines I had before, which I like. Alright, painting over. And once again, if I was painting this exact same thing on the white paper, it would end up being a lighter color, not as much of a greenish blue color. But because I'm able to stack it completely dry, it's a much more vivid color. It's much darker. I've always liked being able to stack it this way, because you can get a lot of bang for your buck when watercolor can be, notoriously hard to get a vivid, bright thing. One of the comments I get the most on the other pieces I've done, like for shows and stuff like that, is how I'm able to get such a strong color palette from just watercolor. Alright, I'm gonna let that sit, let this dry. I'm also gonna show you something else. Alright, so I told you I've got this issue going on where I splattered right here. Now once again, that happened because I was trying to dry it faster for you guys using a hairdryer, which is fine. But as you can see here, I've got a very wet big puddle. Now, something that you can do, for fun, is if you have a straw, what you can do with a straw is you can get this really fun effect. And how you get that effect is by taking a really wet puddle of paint and then just blowing into it, you know, just like that. And then you get this effect. Well, when I'm trying to dry this with a hairdryer, that's exactly what I'm doing, but I don't want this to splatter. So that is what happened here. I basically got this too wet. And what can you do? So, in case you can't see it from up here, this is the mistake I'm referring to. And this is the tool I'm going to use. It's a little wonky, but this is an X-Acto knife. And I can get away with this on cold pressed paper, where I'm going to be scraping just like the top layer off, all right? Because I can get away with this for a couple of reasons. One, I blotted it up as fast as I saw it happen. So this actually was darker, but because I came in with a paper towel, not this crummy one, but a clean one, I was able to soak it up. So it's just in the surface level. So because it's not, it didn't soak in really deeply, it should be okay. It shouldn't be very deep. There should be clean paper pretty much underneath. Another element of that is, with hot press paper, this is completely smooth. However, the trick here is because it's cold press paper, it's bumpy. So if I make this a little more bumpy, it really isn't that noticeable. You can do something like paint over it with white gouache, which is it's not transparent, it's opaque. Texture-wise, I don't really like it. I've had some luck with that, so let's give this a shot. All you're doing is just scraping very gently. Once again, I waited until everything was completely dry, like way dry before doing this. And I'm just trying to scrape just a little bit of that top layer off. Once again, move slow. It is easy. You don't want to gouge it. You're just trying to literally scrape that top layer off. You can see it kind of coming up a little bit like sand. So you can kind of see the texture change. Another thing I like to do, as long as I have completely clean water, now that should be interesting now that I've moved that around. As long as you have completely clean water, something you can do to kind of help settle down basically the tears in the paper you've made. If you have completely clear water, I should put this lid on here. It got a little banged up when I moved here. With this, I can put a little bit of completely clear water on here to kind of like get it to act more gently. But if I don't have a completely clean brush and a completely clear water, it won't do what I want. I don't think it's going to work. I'm not going to take the chance. I'll deal with that later. All right. So I'm actually don't think I'm going to finish that with you guys, but I will show you a little more with the terracotta pots, just because this will take so long to dry, and I'm not going to sit here and make you watch paint dry with me. I figure that's not what you're here for. Now you can add more details here. So in order to make things interesting, this is actually something I saw in a watercolor exercise recently that I liked. You can add stripes to these flowers here, just like you did to the cactus. Get a little more interesting texture. Or if you want, you can always just leave them as they are. So now you got nice stripes there, just to make it more interesting. So we did that. Oh, okay. So something that I've got in this version of the aloe vera is I got these white lines. All right, I have played with this a lot. I have tried many different white markers, and that's what the rustling is in the background, because I'm trying to show you all of the things I have played with. Oh, there's apparently another rusty X-Acto blade in there. Okay, So I've tried lots of different things. I'm gonna show you the two things that I like best. So I have tried using a Sharpie fine point oil-based pen for white details. I have tried using this graphic line painter from Derwent, pigment-based painter. I also, just for the fun of it, and because I had it, one of those chalk markers like you do like on blackboards that like all restaurants and cafes put together. I've tried those. I actually have a little example. Let me see if I can pull that up for you so you can see why I picked the things I did. So that's what this is. It's just all about experimentation. All right, here we go. It's really good idea to get to know your materials before you get into stuff. So this is the Sharpie oil-based right here. I had to do this twice, and it still had kind of a funky glaze to it. The graphic line painter, it ended up mixing with it like it was another layer of paint. Didn't stand out, wasn't as white as I wanted. The Bistro chalk marker actually did surprisingly well. The white jelly roll did pretty good, and it's also easier to use than all of these other big markers. My favorite is the white gouache. So it acts as a paint, it acts like watercolor, but it's opaque, so it stands out on top. So all of this wind up to say there are lots of ways to put white on here. My favorite is to use the white gouache. I feel like it has the truest white. It doesn't mix, it stands out, and I have control over it without it mixing in. So, all that said. I need to look more into this, but this is an acrylic gouache. Something I've run into is this does not reactivate as well as transparent watercolor. So what I mean by that is, when it comes to these paints, these are transparent watercolors, like that. Now, when I put water in here, wakes back up, no problem, completely usable. It's not like acrylic where once it dries, bang, it's gone. So I think that's something that's going on with gouache paints. I'm getting used to them still with other projects I'm working on. So when the gouache dries, it no longer can reactivate from what I can see. So what I like to do, and which is probably very bad practice, I don't know, I'll get a very small brush, very clean. I'll open the tube up like this, and then just honestly dip it straight into the tube. It gives me the level of saturation I want, and I use only as much as I want. You may not be comfortable with that, and that is fine. All right, so that's nice and clean. You can put this on your tray. I'm just showing you how I do this. So all we're doing is just putting stripes right now on the aloe vera leaves. Once again, I'm doing multiple stripes, and I'm trying to get a variety of texture. There's something I can see, but that you may not be able to see, and I'll show you here in a second. Because this is cold press, because it has that knobby surface, it has an effect on how the paint drags right now. So it makes it look more organic. I'm not trying to blot out what we did before. I'm just trying to add some lines for some character. I don't want it to be just flat nothing. I want it to have some shine, some personality. Therefore, I'm adding a little bit of white just to make it a little more interesting. All right. So that's what I do. It's probably bad practice, but bring it to the camera so you can see. As you can see, the white is uneven. I am okay with that. Once again, I really like when these things are uneven. It makes it more fun. All right, once again, I will talk you through the rest of this one, but I'm just going to focus on finishing the pots over here. Ooh, actually, I think I might do white details on that flower real quick. What do you guys think about that? I like that. Okay, come on back, white gouache. Because I can't do transparent white on this. It won't stand out. I gotta have something that goes over top of it. I could also do a yellow gouache there, which if I can find it for you, maybe I'll do that instead. So if you need to backtrack and put a lighter color on top, it can't be the same color, or it can't be a lighter color if it's transparent. So I'm gonna get me some gouache and kind of do the same thing, because I don't need very much. And I'm just trying to do, you know what, I want this to be thinner, so maybe I'm a liar. See if I can do like a little bit like this. And get the stripes here. There we go. So that's what you can do with gouache. It doesn't do the stained glass stacking like transparent, but it does other interesting things. There we go. So that should sit on top. It still does kind of soak in, especially when it's diluted like I have right now, so it pulls better. And so you can stack it on itself, but it doesn't have that glaze stacking that transparents have. One more here. And now it's all fun and stripy. So, unexpectedly, you have an intro to gouache. And I'll leave that one alone just for comparison so you can see the plain versus the stripes. See? And then we'll go back to the terracotta color that we already filled in. But the first thing I want you to do, check and see if it's bled through, like if the green comes through. If so, then paint a second layer on your terracotta color. That will help blot it out even more. And also it'll make sure that it's a completely different color than the bottom part, which makes it more interesting, and I like that. So get that one nice and dark. Same with this one. You can kind of see it coming through, and I'd rather blot it out if I can. So I'm going to do a second layer here. So, but I will show you how to finish the pots on these other two beauties right here. And then you'll be able to handle the rest on your own, and I'll talk you through this one because it's still drying and I don't want it to splatter. All right, so here are your terracotta pots. You want the bottoms to all line up, so you got to make yourself one more guideline. You got to figure out where you want the bottoms of these pots to be. Now, as you can see with like this guy right here, it's nice and skinny, it's cute, and it's different, it's fine. Another thing that you can see is that the bottom of the pot is skinnier than the top of the pot. It tapers a little bit. So if you need guidelines, you can come down, you can draw these guidelines like, you know, where the edge of your pot is. That way you know where to taper into. I didn't have to do that. I don't think you do either necessarily. But you want to figure out where you want the bottom of your pots to be, and then draw yourself a straight line right across the page. So let's say, I think I want this one to be about right here. Delightful. Okay, now if I can find my clear ruler, which is sometimes not the best of ideas when I'm doing things at a table like this. Now that I know that that's about where I want that one to end, it's probably where I want the others to end too. So another guideline for myself for later. Okay. And I'll use that for the bottom of the pots, and I'll show you with these two, since I just painted these collars to be stronger, to overcome the painting over of the leaves because they came down at like different spots. Those are still wet, so I'm going to show you this here with just these two and then walk you through the last one because it's still very wet. And again, I'm not going to make you watch paint dry. Once again, you have more control and you have sharper lines when you do wet on dry. So that's what I'm doing here. Now in this opportunity, or in this part, you definitely could, if you wanted to, switch to a flat brush since you're using flat lines. You don't have to. You don't need to, honestly. And especially if you've already been using the other ones. They're wet, they're ready to go. So don't worry about it. Alright, I'm gonna go a little wider on this end. Just because I'm not too skinny. There we go. Alright. So there is the bottom of our pot. What you can do as well, if you drop in some clear water, it can add an interesting drying effect to make it look more weathered and have variety. Or you can just leave it straight like that. Or you can add like a little more brown in one point to make it a little more natural, a little more interesting. I was going to tell you something, guys, and I forget what it was. I'm so sorry. So, there's your pot. And I'll show you the next one. Let's keep this. I am almost out of this color. I may need to make some again really quick. I'm going to need more later anyways. Okay, almost there. Almost there. There we go. Okay. And once again, just following the line at the top of the pot, or the collar of the pot, starting to taper down. So that the bottom is not as wide as the top. Just fill that sucker in. I remembered I was going to tell you now. Hopefully I remember one more second. Maybe a little more pigment. Drop that in there. Get in there. Okay. Great. And now we have a second pot. Here's what I was going to tell you. Okay. So something, if you want to have fun, do something cutesy, you can always add faces to your pots. I did this with bumblebees before. You can add, just refer to the emojis on your phone, and you can see how I've imitated them here for the pots. I am not a fan of how it turned out, but you can play around with that and see if you like how that turns out. If not, this is a good contemporary succulent piece no matter how you slice it. So, either way, it's up to you if you leave them plain or not. For example, that one had the faces. This last one that I did as an example did not. And I liked how this turned out. That's personal preference. If you want to give personality to them, great, do it. Okay, now I'm going to talk you through the rest of it because stuff is still drying and I don't want to make you watch paint dry for just a few more strokes of work. So I'm going to refer back to what I did before. These I'm not painting because the collars are still drying. I want those to dry before I add the bottoms because I want those to be distinct lines, okay? I actually really like the stripes on that one, guys. That was a new addition. So thanks for experimenting with me. Now, what I'm doing here, and what you can kind of tell from the darkness, is I have added second layers here. I want these, now I'm going to be doing X's, kind of like I did with these striped ones, but without the stripes. So I'm still showing that I have spikes on there, but in a different way. I want that to stand out, and this was too light to my liking, so I'm stacking the transparent watercolor so that it's a stronger, brighter color. So, well, once again, I have this issue where I want those separate sections, but I need these sections to completely dry before I add the next one. So, not only did I have to do that for one layer, I have to do it for a second one. So, that's where I'm at with this right now. I'm not going to make you watch paint dry, but that's what's going to happen. I'm going to add these second layers for these other pieces, kind of like I omitted here. And then at some point I'm going to add the column. It's almost dry, not quite. I don't want to do it unless it's completely dry, because it's a mess if it's not completely dry. Ooh, it's not what I want. And then I'll come down here and add the terracotta pot as well. And then you'll get this nice finished effect where you've got all of these lovely pots. You got nice bright colors, different shapes, different varieties, all put together in a nice contemporary succulent painting that anyone can do. Okay, all right, let me review what I've got coming up as far as classes, what classes I already have recorded that are available for you on YouTube or on the Facebook group, and my usual request. So here is what we made today. And that I am completely confident you can finish on your own. Let me go over some of the stuff that we have going up or going in the past. Tomorrow I'm actually finishing a lesson that I wasn't able to complete last weekend because it took so long. We are doing these hand-lettered flowers and tape and hand lettering and flowers. That's what I'm going for. So we already painted on the leaves, but this took such a long time between the drawing and things of that nature that we haven't gotten to the hand lettering part yet. This is to cancel out those areas. So we got the painting done. Version 1, or the first part of the painting is on YouTube and ready to go for you to watch if you want to start that. Hand lettering and peeling off the tape will be tomorrow. Other stuff that's available for you to watch online if you want. I did a bunch of textures with things like bubble wrap and mesh, leaves from my tree outside, so you can get a real nice texture. This is a really easy one that I got a lot of views on. An easy mountain landscape where you just layer stuff up, all in the same rough color. Super easy to do, not hard to walk through. I do have this one on the Facebook group, but not on YouTube because of video malfunctions, but this one was a lot of fun, not hard to do, just as long as you measure it out. If you've got kids, this is a fun one with bumblebees. You use their thumbprints to walk through it. Super fun. One of my friends with kids actually did it, which was great. Another easy landscape and another contemporary piece. This one goes pretty fast. You can do the 3 circles or just the one. Because there's no overlaying colors, it goes fast. Or you can also do something cheerful. This is kid-friendly as well. Or you can do a more contemporary color like I did on the right. If you're a grown-up and just want to paint something fun and easy. That's what I got for you today. If you liked it, please feel free to donate to my PayPal. Or if you like what I make, I still need to load some of this stuff up onto my Etsy store, but feel free to buy something from the Etsy store or to contact me about private lessons one-on-one where we can interact and I can give you more specific lessons in that way for watercolor and giving you feedback. Anyways, that's what I have for you today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. The bonus backgammon lessons in the background and the bonus of the cat meowing for milk a little while ago. Anyways, hope you guys have a wonderful day, whatever you're up to, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.